So welcome to episode 3 of Level Up, our weekly Q&A show where your questions drive our conversation. If you're watching on LinkedIn or on YouTube, then please do follow the links in the chat to register and we'll send you over to Slido, which is really where you get to join in and drive the show. You can vote up questions, you can add your own questions that you would like the panel to answer. So please do that. If you want the Slido event number, just ask for it in the chat and one of our team will provide it to you directly. So look, without your questions, well, to be honest, we don't have anything to talk about. So we'll end up just talking amongst ourselves. So please do join in, take part. It'll be great to see you and hear your contribution. The first half of the show is general Q&A, and this week's theme is all about digital transformation, something which has been on the news, in our minds, and likely in our workplaces, very strongly featured for the last 18 months or so, and even before then. So you can ask pretty much anything that you would like relating to that in the first half of the show. In the second half, then we've chosen a topic where we want to spend a little bit more time, and we'll talk a wee bit more about that pretty soon. So look, let's get across to meet our panel for the day. We're going to start in South Africa and welcome 3 panelists, beginning with Zakiyya Cassimjee, who is the CIO at Astute, the Financial Services Exchange. Welcome, Zakiyya.
Thanks, everyone. Happy to be here. My role is about enabling people, process, and technology within the data industry for insurance.
Okay, thanks very much, and it's great to see you. Thank you very much for joining today. Also from South Africa is Etienne Shardlow. He's joining from Johannesburg, and he's a senior consultant with Symphonise Consulting. Hi, Etienne.
Hi, Nick. It's good to be here. Symphonise Consulting, we specialize in consulting in change, governance, and, well, transformation.
Okay, brilliant. And really nice to have you on the panel. I know you've contributed a couple of times to other APMG recorded events, so it's great to have you here today live with us. It's an absolute pleasure. Also from South Africa is Johann, who's the CEO at getITright, and he has actually, you've hosted me a couple of times when I've been in your country, so thank you for your hospitality then, and it's great to have you on the show today. And you describe yourself as a digital change provocateur these days, so tell us a little bit more about that. So I can't quite hear Johann at the moment, so I'm guessing that he might have a little bit of an internet issue. So we'll come back to him shortly. Let's move up to Europe and join Jeroen Geurtsen, who is director at the Zest Academy, who are involved in changing lives, teams and organizations through their consulting and training offerings. Hi, Jeroen, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Nick, and nice to be in this panel and answer the questions. And as a Zest Group, we are focusing on the customer value. That's also why I provide the training to our own consultants to make sure that we focus on that. And with the practical experience of myself as portfolio program project manager, IT architect, business manager, data analyst. So yeah,
it's quite a long list.
Like this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know your business has breadth and depth to it, so we're particularly delighted that you could join us today, so thank you very much for doing that. Another person who's making up the panel today is Jan-Willem Middelburg, who is actually joining us from Malaysia. He's the CEO of Cybiant, who are really leading edge training consultancy out there in Southeast Asia, and also the author of the Enterprise Big Data Framework. So welcome, Jan-Willem.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thanks so much for inviting me today. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel with all these great minds. So really look forward to answering and participating in these questions.
Okay, excellent. And Jan-Willem's very kindly going to lead on today's topic. And he's chosen to talk about exploring a little bit more about how to use data to make more informed decisions, right? How we can really drive better decision making by, by thinking about the data that we have available to us in our businesses and organizations. Now, look, you may be feeling watching this that you can actually answer some of the questions yourself and that you'd like to join us here on the panel. And we welcome contributions from everybody all over the world. So please do put yourself forward for a future show. Just click on the link to register. That will take you through and tick the little box that says I'd like to be a panelist. Okay, so look, let's jump straight into the questions and hear from our question master for today, who is Charlotte. She's joining us from the Thames Valley. So Charlotte, can we have the first question, please?
We have a question from Peter, London, UK. How much has the pandemic accelerated your organisation's digital transformation?
Okay, so how much has the pandemic accelerated your organization's digital transformation? I would say hugely in our own case, all right, and absolutely massively. It really has taken off, possibly faster than any of us who are involved on the IT side of the business would have thought 2 years ago. Jan-Willem, your thoughts first, please.
Yeah, well, I think this is a question where I can't even start with looking at the answers. I think if something has taught us in the last, year and a half, it is that digital transformation is not just something that's powering business, it's completely transformed it. There was no way that you could visit customers anymore. There's no way that you could go on site. Right. So I wouldn't say just that it has transformed, it has completely altered the way that we are collaborating, communicating, managing, having discussions with clients, customers, teams, doing development work, and all of that now goes digital. So I think it's been a massive transformation that we've seen due to the pandemic, and I don't think that this is going to stop anytime soon.
No, I totally agree with you there. It has fundamentally changed, the way in which we've been able to do business. I think, it would have been unusual a few years ago to have a business interruption scenario that said, by the way, not only can you not go in your own building, but you can't go inside anybody else's building either. You're all actually going to have to do all of this stuff from home. Zakiyya, what are your thoughts?
So adding on to what Jan-Willem said, it's just changed the way we've worked completely from a team's perspective. And we work in a traditional insurance environment with brokers where it's very much people would like to see face-to-face. And we've needed to change that to create digital identity, technology, all of these other things. How do you engage with your broker via Teams or any other channel that you prefer? How does your consent work? Because not everyone has a printer at home to print their form and get a physical consent signature. So we've had to think about those kinds of innovations in our environment, as well as just our business. Even our entire service desk is cloud-based. Everybody's enabled to work from home. No one's been in the office, and
It's certainly been a hallmark of the organizations who have been able to pivot, so rapidly, and particularly those in financial services, where you've got to balance the ease of the service delivery and getting access to the service, also with the privacy and the constraints that come with good data governance. So absolutely applaud everybody who's been working in financial services, whether it's capital markets or retail banking or insurance and all of the things that make the world go round. Very well done with all of that, because it's been an absolute, exemplar, I think, of, how to get that done at scale and at pace. And certainly in the Dutch market, I guess in the Netherlands, huge, center for financial services. Did you see that happen yourself?
I must say that has already started years before the pandemic. The only thing we see now that travel time has become work time, because you don't need to travel anymore, and I see that really helps the progress of organizations as well. So that is good productivity, and getting used to working online when you use the camera a lot so that you see each other. That helps fantastically as well. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. At the beginning, I think, there were a number of colleagues that, we would be talking to ordinarily just on a telephone, on an pure audio link, and their transition across to using video and, helping people tune into a little bit more of the kind of emotional connection along with what they were saying as well has been remarkable. So yeah, it has kind of changed everything, and it's been quite an interesting, journey for us. And whereas before we were dependent on, trains, and if you were running late for a meeting, you might send a text or something saying, "Oh, the train's delayed." It would in my country anyway. That's what happens in the UK. "Oh, the train's delayed. I'm going to be late." Now it's my neighbour's broadband has gone down or something, or the kids are downloading a movie, so you're going to have to hold on for a little while. So it's not without its complications, I don't think. All right, very good. So thank you very much, everybody. Charlotte, let's move on to the next question, please. Sorry, Charlotte, we can't hear your audio just now.
Sorry. Question from Jane in Glossop, UK. How can my organisation measure return on investment on digital transformation?
Okay, measuring that classic kind of question, isn't it? To the usually from the C-suite when they see the bill. No, Jeroen, let's start with you. How do you actually even begin in that process at looking at return on investment?
Well, you look, of course, at the baseline of your current way of working, and you measure that, and well, you have to define the benefits, make sure that you define measurable benefits, which can either be digital transformation because you let work be automated. Well, that might mean you have less work to do that, which will mean that you can use the work for other stuff. So you can see that your productivity goes higher, or it might be that you have a more certain quality of what you deliver.
Right.
So the quality can be measured as an output. So that will be the two simplest KPIs you would use to see your return on investment. Of course, you need to know how much will my better quality give me on benefit or more revenue.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Johann. I want to bring you in because you're involved in, consulting with a whole range of organisations for decades now around, IT and digital transformation and so on. Where do you typically start with your clients thinking about looking at return on investment specifically?
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me.
We can now, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. I just want to reaffirm what Jeroen has said, is that trying to use conventional metrics to measure success in an environment that essentially that's not project-based always causes problems. So I like the two examples that he gave, quality and performance. So, I mean, that's something that we've been struggling for a long time in any sort of lean environment, is that you can't use MPV because you don't have an end. You can't really use ROI because you've changed the fabric of the organization. So how do you compare? So really, you have to think about the overall performance of the organization and see how that impacts on it.
I think certainly there are some really blunt, kind of measures. In the UK over the weekend, some of the press were talking about the change in retail space on our high streets for retail shops. And the large department stores that used to dominate 30 years ago have been really struggling in the last kind of 10 years. In the last 5 years, they've went into severe decline. And actually, in the last 18 months, they've gone down from having several hundred stores now to having just tens. So it's an 83% decline for them in their particular business model. Now, I'm not saying that digital transformation will have saved all of them, because clearly it hasn't. Many have just simply ceased trading. But the ones who have survived they do have actually quite a strong digital presence. So there may be some correlation there. Etienne, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that digital transformation is almost always about the customer. And if you're going to measure anything, I think customer satisfaction is always a good one to measure. So it doesn't always talk to the bottom line, but without our customers, there is no bottom line.
Right. It's a really good point. And Zakiyya, final comment before we move on.
I just want to say, I also don't think it's a start and an end, like Johann said, a project. I think it's a journey that you go on, and you need to have these baseline milestones and then continuous improvement as you go along. There's no, today we start digital transformation and then we put all the tech in place and then we've ended the transformation. That's not how it works.
No, that's very true. It's kind of start something, you can't stop really, can you? Each time you take a few steps forward, there is then, the next lot of questions. Oh, okay, now that we can do this, why can't we do that? These guys are doing that. We'd really like to do that as well. So you're absolutely right. It kind of takes us into very neatly, I think, moving on with our next question, please, Charlotte.
So we have another question from Jane in Glossop, UK. What role does culture play in digital transformation?
Okay, so this is kind of a really big question, isn't it? To kind of discuss. So Johann, let's start off with you, if I may, and Jan-Willem, I might come to you as well for a bit of input on the culture question as you spend your life moving between, Europe and Southeast Asia. Go ahead, Johann.
Yeah. You asked for short questions. Everything.
Okay.
So any transformation is about people that need to learn how to change their behavior. So it is absolutely vital in any transformation project that you actually focus on people. And the interesting thing is here the change is not only people in a cultural perspective, but we have to now learn to be different, to do different. So C-suite really need to take a lead enabling that change in behavior and culture.
I think you're absolutely right. The role of leadership in this is critical to be able to embrace and adopt different ways of working and really help the organization figure it out. Not necessarily have all of the answers in the leadership team within a business, but it's certainly a key role for them to facilitate and to empower, the wider organization to be able to innovate and make changes. Jan-Willem, what's your experience in this area of, how culture actually affects digital transformation?
Well, I've been fortunate to work in different places across the globe, and you see completely different approaches on how people embrace or reject this digital transformation. So different cultures have, I would say, a tremendous impact. And I kind of, what Johann just said, it's the way that we embrace it, the way we work, but also in terms of manners and the way that people are used to work together. And the way that they're providing feedback on each other's work, the way that they are able to collaborate with each other in a digital format, or whether they're solely focused on working from home and in a more private setting. So there are so many aspects that are coming into play. And what I've experienced over the especially the last year and a half with this whole movement towards working completely remote, is that it's I would say the most crucial aspect that comes into play, and that you would very, very carefully need to manage as a business. Otherwise, you disconnect people, because even though we are now all connected through the internet, you also see that it isolates a lot of people independently.
Yeah, that's very true, and I certainly think that within meetings, you've got to be super careful to ensure that all voices are being heard and that people have an opportunity to contribute. I know that that's always been true in physical meetings, but sometimes you can pick up a few little clues or cues along the way as a facilitator in a physical meeting that you may not always be able to do in a virtual one. Zakiyya, go ahead.
So I think it's important to distinguish between global culture and organizational culture and how these two come together, especially moving to in a gig economy where you're going to have a global workforce working on a project. We're no longer restricted to Europe or India or any one of these, for a labor force. So how do these two cultures come together in this digital transformation? And how do you and the change management, I think, is so important here, especially like Johann said, from a leadership perspective, to buy into that strategy and then motivate people intrinsically. No longer are we saying there's the coffee or there's the games room or, especially in an IT world, because those things are no longer applicable anymore. So how do you intrinsically motivate people in this culture to transform your organization? How do you tell people from a business process perspective, we've automated, this is what it means for you? And then obviously the resistance to change, and then obviously your change champions.
Yeah, I mean, would you say that, do you still agree, and I'll come to you in a moment, Jeroen, do you still agree, Zakiyya, that people, generally don't like change? Or do you feel that it's more that they don't like being left behind?
I think they don't like being left behind. So as long as you're transparent about where you are, and you will get those people that don't want to, be part of the change. And that's also okay. I think there's place in the entire ecosystem for all of us. But as long as you're taking them on your journey, communicating, being transparent about where we are, what our obstacles are, learning, continuous improvement, then I think you will be okay.
Okay, excellent. And Jeroen, your thoughts?
Yeah. I fully agree, and I do understand that people are saying, well, I don't want the digital transformation because that will cost me my job. Yeah, but if we don't do the digital transformation, our competitors are still doing it. It will cost us our total business, and that will also cost you your job. So from cultural perspective, it needs to be entrepreneurial, opportunistic, and well, if you do nothing, freeze or fight. If you're only freezing, you probably will lose everything. And you need to understand that the whole world is moving forward, and you better not, as a company, not stay behind. And that culture should be there. My own experience is that 3 times I was able to fully eliminate my job. It only resulted in promotion. So, yeah.
Okay. No, I think I understand that. I'm just processing that through my mind. But no, I get that. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think you're absolutely right. Standing still is very hard actually to make a business stand still. It's harder, I would say, to pause a business than it is to progress it. So, with that in mind, let's move on, if we may, Charlotte, and take the next question. Thank you.
Okay, a question from Helen in Qingdao, China. Some people say digital transformation includes digital and transformation. What key factors should be considered apart from data?
Okay, so what are the key factors? Johann, go ahead, and then we'll come to Etienne next.
Okay, I'll be brief. Transformation is more important than digital. So we end with digital, but we start with a different business model, doing things differently. In fact, I would actually like people to start talking about business transformation.
Okay, and is that from the perspective that says sometimes we invent a solution and then go looking for the problem, or is it just a more holistic way of thinking?
I think it's a little bit of both. If you start with a preconceived idea, you're not necessarily going to get to the ultimate solution. And I see far too many organizations that's using digital transformation as an excuse to go and spend money on tech. This is about serving our customers better. I like Tim Woodhouse's explanation. He says digital transformation is about making beautiful butterflies, not fast caterpillars.
Okay, that's a really nice one. Yeah. Okay, Etienne, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think transformation is the key word here, and digital is really the tool that we're using to transform how we do business. So we might be transforming our business processes, creating new business processes, opening up new markets, technology and digital is the tool, transformation is the journey. And I think the focus needs to be more on the transformation than the tools we're using. It helps if we're using the right tools, but that shouldn't be our focus.
I think that's really, really important. And we've seen many times, haven't we, an IT solution which, was developed, perhaps with great intentions, but with truly unintended consequences. And it's often because of that transformational dimension. It's not been fully thought through. Very good. So look, we've got time to fit in maybe one more question before we get to our focus topic. So Charlotte, let's have the next question, please.
I think this question is the next question. Sabina, Warsaw, Poland. What is the culture needed for digital transformation? So I think this is slightly different than the previous question.
It is. It's certainly related to the previous question. So I'm just going to jump in fairly quickly on this one. We have heard already about entrepreneurial. We've heard about being innovative. We've heard about being open and ready for change. Panel, really, in kind of just a couple of words, what are your thoughts to add to the question? Johann?
Flat structure, agile.
Etienne?
I think the key here is that this is a journey, and change and digital transformation needs to be more about evolution than changes. We don't want big chunks of change. We want to evolve.
Okay, so little and often in my language then to kind of go along with those thoughts. That's really good. Thank you very much. Jeroen, you want to finish this off before we move into our focus topic?
Courage to grab the opportunity, because if you don't grab the opportunity, you only lose things.
That's a really insightful word, actually, courage. Yeah, you're right. Because you know what, especially at the moment in these uncertain times, there is no certainty. So we do need to have courage, and we do need to kind of dig deep and think to ourselves, what are the inputs that we can use to try and kind of focus on, getting at least some of the answers, pulled together for us to be able to use and take those clear decisions in a timely manner. Okay, so look, we're going to change gears now a little bit and start thinking about our focus topic, which is certainly dovetails well into that question. Today, the topic's all about actually using data to inform better decision making, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're talking about this. This is a topic really close to my heart. I use a lot of data as an input. Data doesn't tell me what the answer is, but it helps me figure out, what might be the answer. And the decisions that we take at work sometimes have very far-reaching consequences. And so getting the right input before we decide can be super important. So look, I'd like to hand over to Jan-Willem, who's going to share his thoughts with us on using data to make better decisions. Over to you, Jan-Willem.
Good. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Nick. What I've done, and I'm going to keep it short and snappy today, is I'm going to provide you with some more insights on how can you get started with that journey. I think in the panel, we already discussed quite a bit of aspects that are necessary to do this. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about, well, how do you enable that? So what are capabilities that you would need to build in order to do that? What I'm going to introduce in today's session as a more of a focus and in-depth topic is especially the enterprise big data framework, because this is a standardized, holistic approach that answers the question, well, how can you get started with building these capabilities? And as you've already mentioned so kindly in the introduction, I have a lot of experience in this data domain. So in today's session, I'll try to, in a very brief overview, give you a highlight of how the framework came about, what kind of challenges it addresses from a cultural perspective, as we've just mentioned, and also how you can get started. So Nigel, if you can move to the next slide. What I've done for today is basically prepared a very high-level agenda. And I'm going to start with the why question. And what I would like you to get out of this session is why are organizations struggling with this? What are the most common challenges that most organizations are facing with the management of all these major data sets that are available right now? but also not just to kind of address the problem, because I think most of us will be familiar with that, but also to focus a little bit further on how can we actually then address that. And you will hear me say the word capability quite a lot, because I think that that is the aspect that we're still missing, the missing link in this discussion. So that's what I'm going to focus on today in this short, in-depth session. So Nigel, if you can be so kind to move towards the next 2 slides, then I'm going to get started with a little bit of news. And these are articles that I again recently found, and the links are there as well. And we've all known, we are all busy with this digital transformation. We've seen that it's important, and especially as we've also discussed in the panel, it's kind of become mandatory. Business has changed, and organizations are now seeing that they can outperform others if they do this better, or they need to because their competitors are doing that. Yet, if you look at the progress that organizations are making, there are still so many companies that are really struggling in this journey to become data-driven. And that's also what you see on the right. I know it's been kind of zoomed in, but research has found that around 83% of companies are really struggling to get value out of their data organizations. So they know that it's important. They want to make a competitive advantage through data, but they're really struggling with how. And that's what we would like to focus in a little bit deeper on this session. Why is that the case? And what can you do in order to address that? So some really insightful research that I always like to use in my presentations is coming from the McKinsey Institute, which we see on the next slide. And they have analyzed 10 red flags which kind of signal that your big data and analytics programs will fail. And if you look at these 10 bullets or 10 most common red flags, you see that not a lot of them will focus, well, we are lacking technology or we're lacking a particular tool. It's all about culture. So you see topics 1 and 2, the executive team doesn't have a clear vision. There's no strategy in place. There are no roles properly defined. We don't have processes in place. None of these say, well, we should buy another next expensive tool. None of these say we don't have capable databases or we don't have the opportunity to capture our data. So if you were to analyze these 10 statements in a little bit more detail, and that's what we see on the next slide, you basically see a number of key topics. So what I've done here is that I've kind of highlighted them in different colors and addressed core focus points that would need to be addressed. And you see that if you summarize these challenges, if for lack of another word, of what organizations are facing, it's all elements that are related towards the analysis of data, but it's not the actual tool itself. So these are questions around strategy, they're questions around people, so the leadership aspect and the culture aspect that we just discussed. There are questions around processes. How do we deal with data governance, data security? And only one statement out of the 10 goes around technology. So this is something that I've been experiencing myself also with a lot of organizations. It's typically not about only the technology. In order to really be successful with this, you need to take additional steps. And that's why we developed the Enterprise Big Data Framework, which we kind of see on the next slide. And the Enterprise Big Data Framework is a model that looks at critical capabilities that you would need in order to get your organization data-driven. So it's looking at not, what is your situation today, but how can you address those inconsistencies, these gaps? How can you set up a long-term strategy? And the key phrase that I always like to use is how do you win in the data economy? How are you going to prepare for those next steps? So the approach that we've taken when we developed the Big Data Framework is, can we define these critical capabilities? Can we devise a program that is focused on knowledge and skills? So how do we teach people how to do that? Can we find a vendor independent approach? So one that's not just, again, trying to sell the next gimmick or tool, and a methodology that is going to specifically focus on the people aspect. And that's where kind of the starting points of how the big data framework came to what it is today. So the big data framework itself is something that provides really a more practical and pragmatic approach to increase the capabilities of organization. And on our next slide, we are going to show you what those capabilities exactly are. So on the next slide, you will see a high-level overview of the critical capability areas that are part of the enterprise big data framework. And they are all addressing independent parts that you would need to consider, but you cannot really miss a particular capability. So in very high-level summary, and I have a very quick slide on each one, you need to think about your strategy. So strategy is the first point. One of my favorite quotes is coming from the book Alice in Wonderland, or the movie, in case you haven't read the book. And it's, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. There's so tremendous amounts of data out there. You can spend the rest of your life analyzing data. There's no way you can get that done. You cannot even view it all. So you need to get started with determining what is the focal point. How are we going to get a competitive advantage? So in other words, you need a strategy. That's the starting point. So building that up is the first step towards a successful delivery in big data. Then the second part of the capability model is that, yes, you do need technology, but you need more than just a couple of fancy tools. You need an architecture. You need to connect all of the pieces together and make sure that data is processed in an efficient and way in which you piece all of those tools together. So rather than focusing on the tools, focus on the architecture. And you see quite a bit of a complex slide here, but that is what you would need to set up in order to get your technology in order. Then a third key capability is, and I'm going to skip this one because this is tools. There's thousands. There is maybe even more than this. So it's too small to read. But the third thing that you would need is people who understand, how do I get the value from the data? Because you can buy the most fancy tools in the world. If you don't know how to use them, if you don't know how to extract data, or how to extract value from data, it's just going to be useless. It's typically what I like to refer to as the needle in the haystack. First, you need to know what you're looking for. So this is also typically referred to as the domain of data science. You need some people that have an understanding of how does this work and what kind of tricks can I use in order to extract that. So here on the slide, you see, for instance, an example of how you can build different customer profiles if you just look at your customer data. So that's a third key capability that you need to start building. Then in our fourth key capability, and I think this is something that we should have also maybe addressed in the panel discussion, is how do we deal with process? We're confronted nowadays with all kinds of legislation, with data privacy rules, security, data governance. All of these aspects warrant processes. So before you start any kind of project, you need to have your house in order first. So looking at these kinds of key processes is going to be crucial in order to be successful. Then next, in area number 5, and this is probably my most favorite part of the framework, so I can talk about this for hours. I promise I won't do that, but that's the people aspect. So we need to start thinking about, how do we establish a culture? How do we set up a place in the organization where this can prosper? And we've labeled this functions because you need a function in the organization that does this. And crucial to that is, how do we start combining, sharing knowledge? How do we set up culture? How do we use methodologies like Agile to kind of really transform the organizations from a cultural perspective? And we've labeled that a big data center of excellence because that's a place on how you can set that up. And then the last critical capability is, in order to really start making these more predictive descriptions, you will also need a flavor of artificial intelligence. And I know that this is a container term that everyone nowadays uses, but if you look very closely at the framework, you see that it's a circle around it. And what that means is, before you can even start thinking about artificial intelligence, you need to have your house in order first. So those other 5 capabilities that we talked are equally useful for the analysis of big data as that you would need for artificial intelligence. So a lot of companies are always coming saying, well, I'd like to start an AI project. And the first question that I always ask is, well, let me have a look at your big data strategy. Oh, we don't have one. Well, then AI is going to be very, very difficult. Right. Because it works on the same architecture, it works on the same strategy, it's based on the same principles. It's using the same data governance processes, security processes that you would need in big data. So that's basically how we're connecting the worlds of AI towards big data as well. So in just 10 minutes, and I stayed within the time, which is hopefully correct. A very short recap of the big data framework that you see right here. The key thing that I want you to take away from this talk is that it's about more than just technology. You need to start building critical capabilities in 6 key areas in order to win in the data economy. And that's what the big data framework is all about. So obviously, we have a very strong partnership with APMG, and for the people who are interested in that, they can go into educational programs in order to do that. So that's in the last slide of this presentation. If you want to get your certification through APMG, we've developed a number of different levels, which is on the left-hand side, you see more of a business track for people who want to get value from data. And on the right-hand side, we have a more technical track, which is looking at, well, what are some of those technical capabilities that you would need? And there's corresponding levels and certifications for each. So I hope that kind of provided a short, slightly enlarged elevator pitch of what the big data framework is trying to address. So maybe it's good if we can connect to some of the questions that I saw coming in while we were doing this. And let's hear it from the panel as well.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Jan-Willem. It's a really kind of fast romp through the enterprise big data framework, because it's a vast, set of ideas and thoughts and guides and governance that allows you to make real progress against these things. You said some really interesting points there, and I want to pick up on a couple of them, kind of, if I may, before we jump into the questions. So the first one was talking about process, and looking to the panel to talk a little bit more about process. Do you want to expand on that a little bit, and then we'll bring in members of the panel around the process change that's important with this?
Yeah, very good. Absolutely. So let me give you a very quick example to kind of safeguard the discussion. So suppose that you're a global company, you have customers in multiple countries, and you would like to do some kind of an analysis on, which customer should we target which advertising to. So literally, if you are starting to combine your customer data set from the UK and you bring it over here to Malaysia or Singapore to process it, you're already in violation. You cannot transfer customer data between boundaries right away, because that violates GDPR, it violates data privacy and security processes. So if you really take this seriously, and especially larger businesses will have to, because the fines are pretty significant if you don't, you need to start thinking about, how do I structure my data? How do I set up these data governance and security processes? How do I ensure that we're compliant to rules and regulations around that? And today it's still, I would say, greenfield. There's not a lot of aspects or companies that take that very seriously, but we're getting towards that stage. And so setting up your processes right from the start is really crucial. And that includes a variety of different topics, ranging from the way that we analyze data, the way that we use data, but also the security aspects. And that's a crucial part.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a very strong movement around the world, individuals, even manufacturers. If you look at what Apple is doing with its operating systems, about helping individuals manage their privacy in a very different way to how it has been exploited up to this point. The individuals really lost control of their own data. And I think I see a big trend, kind of reversing that coming over the next few years. So let's jump then into the questions, if we can, Charlotte, and have the first question on the focus topic, please.
So a question from Yvonne in Toronto, Canada. For many organizations, starting with a data-driven digital transformation is overwhelming. What tips do you have for helping break this down into bite-sized chunks?
So, Jan-Willem, where would you begin, and then we'll come to Zakiyya.
Well, where do I begin is a little bit in line with the presentation I just did, is start building it up into what are the crucial capabilities that my organization needs. And those will be, yes, they will be in technical terms, but they will also be in culture terms. They will be in process terms. So by breaking it down into these smaller components, it becomes to really start building those capabilities. So that would be what I would recommend to get started.
Okay, thank you, Zakiyya.
Just to add on to that, I think is, look at the big picture like your iceberg. And if your end goal is AI and machine learning, firstly, have the culture and strategy in place. Does your exec buy into it? What's your strategy? And then what is your business case around it, your why for going on this process? And then from a data perspective and people, so do you have the skills, etc., to do this? And from a systems perspective, do you have the architecture, the pipelines, the governance frameworks, etc., in place? And then lastly, I think would be the top of the iceberg, which is your machine learning models and your AI, which is where you want to get to. So for me, that's a more practical way, exactly to what Jan-Willem is saying, of breaking this down into bite-sized pieces.
I think you're absolutely right. People want to get to the solution, but they miss out the steps on the journey, and so they end up in a very different place. Jeroen, and then Etienne, I'd really like to come to you in a moment as well, just to talk about that common mistakes in approaching machine learning and AI. But Jeroen, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Well, Etienne mentioned this also, but to understand where the value of your data is, do good business process modeling and understand what data you are using where and how that will influence your business process and the value your business process is adding. So it's that holistic view of your business model that you also should have.
Okay, thank you very much. Good insight there. Etienne?
Yeah, I think when it comes to data particularly, it's a good idea to start, it sounds cliched, but start where you are, understand what data you currently have, but also be aware that your current data sets may have some, data is data. So data can't itself be biased, but our data is based on stuff that we as humans do. And if you are going to buy into and start using AI and machine learning, machines can very quickly learn from human mistakes. So it's important that we understand where the data comes from, how the data was collected, so that we don't inherit biases and inherit what we call bad data. I don't believe there is such a thing as bad data, but you can have data sets that are skewed because we don't understand what we've got.
Yeah, I think that is very true. As an examination institute, one of the things that comes up quite a lot with us is when people look at the kind of work that we do to structure better questions in an exam to make them challenging and at the same time insightful and yield a certain outcome. That's a real skill. And understanding the context in which you're asking the question is very important, and the context in which the questions were asked originally to harvest that data and collect that data are super important, because extrapolating from a base which is quite narrow to a place which was never intended when you were harvesting that data can lead to some very unintended consequences for organizations. So really, really good advice there. Let's move on, Charlotte. Next question, please.
Question from Danielle in Maastricht, the Netherlands. How about data received through face recognition? While I understand the purpose of, e.g. at airports, face recognition tells us much more about human being, which would be beyond that purpose. Am I concerned about data being used for manipulation? How can one avoid that?
Okay, so facial recognition software, it makes things really easy for us when we're trying to struggle with remembering complex passwords on phone devices and so on, but it can be misused quite easily as well. What are the thoughts there from the panel about balancing the rights of the individual to privacy and the rights of an organization to, perhaps keep people safe or, protect a vulnerable environment like an airport? Jan-Willem?
Yeah, well, it's a very good and valid question, and I've been working in this field for quite a long time, and the honest truth is you should be concerned, because these kinds of technologies are very powerful, and they can, if they're used in the wrong context or in the wrong reasons, they can invade data privacy and security concerns for to a significant extent. So the second question is more interesting, and I think is, what can we do around that? And I think there is still, we're still at a very early stage in which we don't requirement and motivation for governments and regulatory agencies to get involved in technology should be allowed to be used, because if you just leave this open, we're going to see some years, is my very strong belief.
No, I think you're right to flag those concerns. We're already seeing misuse of text-based information. We've seen misuse of connecting different silos of information together, and when you start taking it into the auditory and the facial recognition area, then the opportunities for the misexploitation of that information, they're exponential. So it's a huge area of concern. Etienne, your thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that, facial recognition data is a huge invasion of privacy, or can be. And I think we need to be careful as organizations with how we use that kind of information. But if we get the basics right, when we think about the data that we collect about individuals, that data can be used to make our customers' lives easier, to help us understand individual customers. You think about shopping points and things like that help us advertise products that are uniquely marketed to individuals. A lot of individuals want that, and they're happy to share that information with supermarkets so that the supermarket can make the offers that are kind of custom made. And so there are advantages to using personal information. I think we've got to find, as organizations, a balance between how we use information for identifying overall trends and making sure that we anonymize that information, and then keep the personal information that we use for directing and targeting specific products and specific services to individuals. We need to make sure that that information is locked down and kept separate. And there's a big focus on privacy laws and things that are going to help organizations. But, we as organizations also have a responsibility for protecting and looking after that personal information.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. Zakiyya, last thoughts on this question before we wrap up?
So I think it's important to what Etienne is saying around single view of the person. All those sources of data, the amount of information you could get is incredible, and the profile that you could build and then use those going forward. But it then also brings into the play the ethics that goes behind this. And when I was talking earlier about digital identity and digital theft, it's common nowadays. And how do you create that source that says, I've got an identity at place A, place B, place C, which is the source of the true identity? How will you identify yourself digitally going forward in the future and prove that this is you actually, with deep fake, with all the algorithms, etc., going on around?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One of the organizations that we work with very closely is involved in policing in the UK, and they lead on trying to combat identity theft and fraud online, and economic crime that's being conducted online. And as digital transformation has accelerated, so have criminals. They've pivoted to exploiting this kind of source of information, and then holding people to ransom for it, or misusing that information in different ways. I do think it's part of all of our roles, whatever role we have in our own organizations, to really be mindful about that, and to think about, why are we collecting this information in the first place? Do we really need it in this way? If we do need it, how long do we actually need it for? Because holding on to it, in perpetuity or for a period of time, which is beyond its reasonable use, it's wrong in law, and also it's wrong ethically in practice. We should not be doing that. And if you take a photograph, a digital image of somebody who visits your building, well, when you're allowed to visit buildings again in your country, but when you visit a building, how long do you store that photograph for? Why do you need it? When they leave that same day, why do you hold on to that photograph, and so on and so on? You need to think about the reasons behind what you're doing, how you're harvesting that information, how you're managing it, how you're governing it, and also just think about, could we just let that information go? Because we don't really need it any longer. All of those sorts of thoughts are good to think about when it comes to great data governance. Well, look, thank you very much, everybody. We're just about kind of coming up to the top of the hour now, so we're going to leave it there. Thank you, Jan-Willem, for really interesting insight into using data to make better decisions. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much, all of the folks who went online and joined the Slido conversation and put in your questions. We've not answered all of the questions today, so I know that some of those will carry over to a future event. But I want to thank on everybody's behalf, the panel, for your insight and your experience. It was really invaluable. So thank you very much. Great job, everybody. Look, next week, we actually accelerate ourselves a little bit further, because we've got 2 shows. Join us early at 7 a.m. British summer time, and that is 11:30 in India, or 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Australia on the Eastern Standard Time, as we discuss project and change management. And the focus topic for that session is all about change in the pandemic, so it kind of builds on some of the things that we've talked about today. Later on next Monday, 1 in the afternoon British summer time, 2 o'clock in Europe, and 8 a.m. in the States on the eastern side of the US, we'll be talking about the theme of organizational agility. How do you get it? How do you get more of it? How do you achieve it faster? And also focusing in on how to overcome any barriers that there might be to you becoming more agile as an individual, a team, or indeed an organization. Do subscribe using the little QR code on the screen to the show, and we'll send you a personal summary of what's coming up next week and how you can join us here on the panel as well. All the time working together to level up your career with APMG. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you on the next show. Thanks. Bye-bye now.